Maybe this is a good place to ask. In working closely with Donald Trump, what, in your sense, looking into the mind of the man, what's the biggest strength of Donald Trump as a leader?
I would say his unpredictability. I think that as a leader, he consumes a ton of information. He doesn't like to be managed or have his information filtered, so he'll speak to a lot of people to draw his information himself. He's very pragmatic. I don't see him as terribly ideological. I see him as somebody who's about results. I think he wants to deliver results. Um, and I think ultimately, I mean, he's an incredible fighter. He's a big counter puncher, but he also wants to get along with people, and that's probably the biggest surprise that people found with him. I mean, you look at even situations like I would always tell people, if you disagree with him, don't go on television and criticize him. Just pick up the phone and call him, and go see him, and he'll talk to you about it. He may not agree with you, but again, that's what Kim Kardashian did when she had a case of clemency with a woman, Alice Johnson, that she felt strongly about. We went through the case. I wouldn't have had her call if I didn't think it was a legitimate case. So we spent about 8 months quietly working through the case, working through the details to make sure that it really was a worthy case. I brought it to President Trump, said, she'd like to come meet with you to talk about this case. And he said, have her come in. So she came in, we went through the case, and President Trump ultimately granted the clemency to Alice Johnson, who was a woman who was accused of being part of a drug ring. She had basically a life sentence for doing it. She'd served 22 years in prison. While in prison, I mean, she's basically was a grandmother, and she was, putting on the prison plays. She was mentoring, young women in prison. Somebody who, again, there's always a risk, but by and large had a very, very, very low risk of committing a crime in the future. And then it goes back to the notion of, are we going to judge people by the worst decision they make in their life? And so President Trump was willing to grant the clemency, and it went. And I think that it just goes to the notion of like, maybe this goes back to his unpredictability in a positive way, which is if you go sit with him and you make your case, he'll hear you, he'll listen to you, and he's not afraid to act, and he's not afraid to be controversial, which I think is a good thing. So from a foreign policy point of view in particular, his unpredictability just meant that everyone was always on their back foot. People were afraid to kind of cross America. And what I would tell people who don't like Trump is I would say, think about how crazy he's making you and his enemies. He did that to the enemies of America. And yeah, so he was a very, very strong president, and I think did a great job.
So, in some of these agreements that we've been talking about and speaking with leaders, how do you think the unpredictability helps?
So in all the agreements that I was negotiating, I wasn't doing it as a principal. I was doing it on behalf of President Trump. And people knew that I had access to President Trump, and they knew that, I could say, you may say this that we don't like, but I'm going to have to take it back to him, and then we'll see what he does. And one of the biggest instances was on the USMCA trade deal, where that deal happened because Mexico was legitimately concerned, and smartly so, that President Trump was going to impose tariffs on the car industry, which would have been decimating to their economy. And by the way, he was ready to do it. We were holding him back from doing it with every ounce of strength that we could. So it wasn't a bluff. I mean, that was actually real, but they were smart to read that it was real. And ultimately, we created a great win-win deal. I'll tell you a funny story just popped into my mind from the tariffs is we used a 232 national security exemption to protect our steel industry. And we put tariffs on steel and aluminum. And again, I thought about this because we also negotiated them with Canada. And there was a very funny phone call where Trudeau was calling Trump. And again, they got along, decently well. And Trudeau's calling saying, you can't put national security tariffs on us in Canada. We're your NATO ally. We fought wars with you. We do military together. And Trump says to him, didn't you burn the White House down in 1812? And Trudeau says, that was the French. He says, no, it was the Canadians. And so it was just, like I said, he's always keeping everyone on their toes.
Yeah.
And, but he wasn't he took very calculated risks. And like I said, everyone was outraged all the time with everything. But if you look at his body of work, people said if he was elected, he would start World War III. Meanwhile, we inherited a world filled with wars, no new wars, right? 3 years, he made peace deals. No new wars. He was tough. He was strong. People respected him. He built relationships. and got trade deals done, got peace deals done. The economy was rocking. His body of work, I think, was pretty strong as president.